Good morning, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'll be reviewing for you Shuten Order for the Nintendo Switch. Technically, I rented the Switch 2 edition, but since this is my first time playing the game, I wanted to make it clear that I'm reviewing the game in its entirety, and it just happens to have the Switch 2 editions built in, but we'll talk about that in due time. For now, the premise of this game is that you wake up as an amnesiac who was supposedly the founder of a nation in her previous life, and now she's been given a temporary body to investigate one of 5 possible culprits in her murder. And if she gets the murderer to confess, then she'll be able to be resurrected. Now, the game presents it as though you only have one shot at this, but in actuality, it is very much required to interrogate all 5 of the ministers that could be responsible. But here's the catch. Each interrogation is a different gameplay style. So it's really almost like 5 games in one. Now, this isn't 100% true, as there's a lot of in-between moments where you're really just reading dialogue. Sometimes you'll click on parts of the environment to investigate, and sometimes you'll actually walk around, but these hardly ever take more than a couple of minutes. But you're here not to hear about the boring parts. You want to hear about the different gameplay styles. So since I'm an optimist, I decided I would rank the 5 genres in order from worst to best so that we can start out with the positive, and then I'll give my overall impression of the story as a whole. By far, the worst route, in my opinion, is the one that's a dating sim. Mainly because it's very, very one-sided, and you can tell that it's forced. You don't need me to explain that to you. Literally, Ray is poisoned during the interrogation of the minister, and the minister says that she's fallen in love with Ray, but she doesn't want it to be that easy, so she decided to make a game where she would disguise herself as someone at this high school, and then you have to successfully make the minister fall in love with you, even though it is very much one-sided and it's under duress. So the stakes are high, but the believability factor is incredibly forced. Not to mention that the girls that you interrogate have really obnoxious personalities where they're very moody and very extreme, and it just feels like you're constantly on edge and walking on eggshells. Now, for the most part, during the actual dating process, what you actually say in the dates don't seem to matter, as even if you click the wrong option, Ray will eventually apologize and say the right thing. Really, the biggest challenge during these sections is that you have a time limit, and the time limit gets gradually more intense as you go along, and you basically just have to pick from an overhead map which part of the school you're going to investigate. So it's really a matter of being at the right place at the right time. Where the challenge comes in is in the real-time talking, where you will have to pick one of 2 options within a time limit to say to the girl. And if you say the right thing, then you'll proceed. But if you say the wrong thing, then her rage gauge will go up. You'll still proceed anyway if you make a mistake, but it's if the rage gauge fills all the way up that you'll have to retry from the beginning. Sometimes saying nothing is the right thing to do, and so you'll just have to wait out the clock. Other times the clock will go ridiculously quickly, and you'll have to just make a choice by impulse. While it is nice that there's a little bit of mercy here, as you can make some mistakes and still successfully confess, but at the same time, some of the options are worded in such a vague way that I don't see how any players are going to get this perfectly right on the first try. And again, considering how forced it is and how extremely unlikable these girls are, it's just an absolute pain. Now, in fairness, I do like how this route resolves, but I'm more of a journey over the destination type of person, and it just was not fun almost at all this entire time. Even when the game tried to have poignant moments, you knew that it was all an act and all under duress anyway, so what was even the point of you getting emotionally invested? Next up is the multi-perspective adventure. Now let me be clear in this ranking that the rest of the routes are significantly better than the dating sim. But at the same time, I still thought it would be fun to rank them, so consider this more of a great to really great type of deal. Now this is basically more or less a beginner's 999, because during this route, pretty much everything is overly explained to you. How the character is feeling, what your surroundings are, and there's next to no animation, and you just have to rely on stills and a sort of watercolor environment to take in what's going on. At times, you'll have to make a choice about what to say or what to do, and depending on your choice, that opens up new story routes. So essentially, there are multiple timelines. Unlike the Zero Escape games, usually these choices are one of only two. So it's not super involved at first, but since it's a multi-perspective adventure, sometimes your choices will affect what another character can say. And so you usually have to think, how is my choice going to impact other people in this adventure? I thought that this was by far my favorite in terms of, from my perspective as a Catholic, because obviously these kinds of adventures like 999 are very story driven. There's no gameplay during this route, but the actual story plays out really well, and there are some really great twists. I really liked how it showed the Catholic perspective of even good people can make the wrong choices if their sense of justice is distorted. Sometimes you might think someone is evil or irredeemable, but in actuality, maybe that person is just misunderstood. So it gives you this idea that really only God knows the true intention of a person's heart, and it's our job to not judge, but to treat everyone with love and maybe hear everyone out, because you never know. Maybe the person that you think is this horrible person is actually good deep down inside, and maybe the person that you respect the most has a couple of things to sort out. So it probably got me the most emotionally invested out of all the routes, but it's still only at number 4 because all you're really doing is just reading and making a decision and then hoping for the best. But it is fun to see how you make one wrong decision and it can spiral into a bunch of chaos that you didn't anticipate. But thankfully it's really easy to retry your steps and go to another step on the flowchart, especially because it's nowhere near as complicated as that of Zero Escape. So, boring in terms of gameplay, but the most emotionally fulfilling and some of the best story arcs in the entire game. The stealth route kind of speaks for itself. You move around in an isometric perspective, and you have to solve various environmental puzzles in order to proceed, such as making all the statues face toward the center of the arena, or finding a passcode to hack into a computer. As is usually the case in a stealth game, there is an enemy called Nephilim that is chasing you with a chainsaw, and in order to avoid Nephilim, you either have to, 1, just not get spotted, put down shutters so that Nephilim will have to cut through them and you have more time to escape, or hide inside a closet. Now, this slightly took me out of the immersion a little bit because it seemed like all of the shutters and all of the hiding closets were just asset reused and were just conveniently placed because they had to have a stealth game. But at the same time, the sense of tension was really palpable. Even though I turned off the voice acting because there's no English dub and I just don't like to hear people talking in a language that I can't understand, the game still registered Ray's breathing and her fear as sound effects. And I think the actress did a really good job of really selling this idea that she is going to be torn apart if she fails this. But what makes this more doable for me than for other stealth games is that there's really only one enemy on the field that you have to worry about, and you could probably logically deduce how the enemy is going to move if you pay attention to the map. Usually it's pretty easy to find the map, and usually the map will have some kind of indicator about where you're supposed to go, and even if it doesn't, usually trial and error will get you through it. It has a really great story, and once you reveal what is actually going on with Nephilim, it's a very surprising conclusion. I also like how you can rotate the camera just a little bit, just in case the view is a bit obstructive. And it is fun to solve the environmental puzzles. But the next two routes are where the game really shines as someone whose favorite series is Zero Escape and who wanted to be a detective for a good portion of his life. Next up, we have the death game route. And since this game was made by some of the people who worked on Danganronpa and Zero Escape, it's pretty obvious that they were inspired by those franchises. What is really cool is that this is the only route in the game where it has two completely different art styles that are overlapping each other. The death game is actually broadcasted to a live stream, and so on the bottom right corner of the screen, you'll see a fully 3D VTuber model that's narrating the stream. Then you'll see comments from the audience on the upper right side of the screen, but then you'll have the normal art style of everyone in cardboard cutouts and comic book style writing. And what you'll have to do is you'll move around in a first person perspective, very similar to games like Etrian Odyssey, where you move forward or turn around in a very tank-like movement. Occasionally, you'll spot puzzles that are easy to learn, hard to master. At first, the puzzles are pretty easy, but they get much more complex as you go along, especially because you have a time limit for most of these puzzles to move you along. There are also rules to the death game, which I won't explain to you because I don't want to confuse you, but suffice to say that you don't have to make nearly as crazy of decisions as you would in something like Zero Escape. And typically, even if you make the wrong choice, since this isn't the multi-purpose adventure, it's not going to spiral things out to a completely different timeline or anything to that extent. Usually the wrong choices will give you a game over within mere seconds, so then you'll immediately be able to make the right decision. For fans of Zero Escape, I think they're really going to like near the end of this, where there's an actual escape room. I won't show any footage of it because I want you to be surprised. But it was fun to kind of relive the Zero Escape days and try to piece together how to escape from the room. Although I do find it odd that there's almost no hints for this room, and some of the hints that you do receive are misleading. Like, they don't actually mean anything. So I wondered, was that just there to confuse the player to try to make this harder? Either way, it's a shame that there was only one of these escape rooms and the rest of it just felt like Etrian Odyssey, but I liked how there were different art styles going on, and just the idea that the live streamer could potentially give you hints because she doesn't realize that Ray can tell that she's watching the live stream and doing the death game at the same time. And it's interesting to see the moral dilemma at play here and to see how the more morally sound people handle themselves. And of course, the love for Zero Escape and Danganronpa is just very, very nice. I think the payoff was a little bit weak, but at the same time, again, I'm a journey over the destination type of person, and solving the puzzles and especially the escape room was absolutely euphoric. But there's just one more route that I think was so much fun that it's even better than something that was inspired by Zero Escape. And that route is the detective route. Basically, this is a glorified Ace Attorney parody, where you have to solve a murder mystery by investigating crime scenes, talking to witnesses, and then eventually you'll have a meeting, which are basically this game's equivalent of the courtroom trials, and then you'll have to present enough pieces of evidence to try to solve the mystery. Now, the investigation sequences were typically my least favorite parts of the Ace Attorney games. But here they make kind of a twist that, if I had to guess, is kind of making fun of Ace Attorney. And that's that in order to get a piece of evidence into your case record, you need to snap your fingers so that Ray will have perfect recognition of it. Again, it's all part of this power of God type of plot that's going on in the background. But the thing is, snapping is conspicuous. And so you need to make sure that you don't snap at the wrong time, or make people be like, why the heck are you snapping, and what does this line of questioning have to do with the case? So you'll have to think, are the words highlighted in green actually going to make a meaningful difference in the case, or are you just nitpicking at the smallest things? It kind of reminds me of how an ace attorney, sometimes you'd be prevented from continuing an investigation because you did something as little as forget to click on a bush. And so it's kind of saying, like, really prioritize what you're investigating. And just in case you need help, usually the minister that is accompanying you will give you a hint about what stuff is actually important to investigate so that you cannot waste your time on innocuous stuff. Although the game doesn't always make sense with what's considered appropriate snapping, because there was one part of the investigation where I was in an empty room and I was told, oh, your snaps don't work here in this empty room unless if you're at exactly the right place. So even though no one was annoyed, I still got penalized because I investigated the wrong thing. Thankfully, once you get into the actual meetings and you're presenting evidence, even with the splash screen of Ray pointing her finger outstretched just like Phoenix Wright did, it's pretty much perfect from here on out. It's really fun to look at the evidence carefully and answer the questions. Occasionally, there are moments just like in Ace Attorney where you know what it is that you want to say and maybe you're a couple of steps ahead of the characters, but you just don't know exactly how to say it in the way that the game wants you to. But I would say that in general, this section is far more forgiving than most Ace Attorney games. And there are some checkpoints so that you don't have to go all the way through another meeting again. And even if you do, it's pretty quick to fast forward. I had a blast nearly every second of this. And it was really fun discovering how the murders were played out and what the motives were. And it did really feel like something Shu Takami would probably have come up with. I wouldn't say it's quite an Ace Attorney replacement per se, because it's not in a courtroom, so therefore it doesn't have that satisfaction of interrogating really over-the-top witnesses, because the fact that Ace Attorney was a satire of the Japanese courtroom is what was its main appeal, besides just pretending to be a detective. So here it's mainly just the detective aspects without the satire, but it's still very effective, and it's still so much fun for my detective brain that loves solving mysteries. Now, as far as Shuten Order as a whole, I am really grateful that you have an opportunity to interrogate all 5 ministers, and that there's quite a lot more to do even after you've done all 5 routes. So this is a pretty darn long game. I think it took me between 30 to 40 hours. It's not very replayable though, because once you know the answers to everything, the only reason I'd see you wanting to replay it is if you like the foreshadowing. And it also really depends on how much you like the gameplay styles. Like, if there's one route that just doesn't do it for you, it might end up ruining the whole game. Especially if one type of gameplay is just really hard for you. But I personally really thought that the story was intriguing. I really felt like I needed to see it through to the end because the game did such a good job of making me curious about how everything was connected. And for the most part, I was satisfied with the finale and thought that the game overall had a very great story. At the same time, there were plenty of moments where I felt like you really had to suspend your disbelief, which again, this is a game made by Kazutoru Kodaka. He's known for having very over-the-top stories that don't take themselves seriously, but sometimes it just feels like the characters in this world are really dense. Like, for example, you may have noticed that Rei wears a mask over half her face. This is because you are told you are the reincarnation of the founder of a nation. If people see your face, they'll be able to recognize who you are. But it only covers half of her face. Like, I could see if maybe one character in the game had face blindness, that maybe that would be a factor, but every single person in this game, you're telling me can't recognize half a face? Like, that just seems too far-fetched. Also, for some bizarre reason, literally every single character in this game assumes that Ray is a guy, and that's revealed pretty close to the start of the game. I think it's just one of those gender stereotyping things where because Ray has short hair and a flat chest, people are automatically gonna assume that she's a guy. But I find it weird how, like, even the doctor can't even figure it out. And you'd think that the doctor would be an expert at anatomy. You'd also think people would use other factors, like Ray's voice. But as it is, I can't fault the game too much for its logical inconsistencies, because, again, Journey Over the Destination, it was a lot of fun to piece things together. And even though the finale did drag quite a bit, it was satisfying to actually see everything resolved. Overall, Shuten Order was an absolute blast, except for the dating section, and I think people who say that it was underbaked probably were thinking that entire games that were dedicated to these genres do it a whole lot better. And I would agree, like, on their own, these are more like watered down versions of much better games that flesh out these concepts. But taken as a whole, it does lead to a really satisfying finale, and the progression of piecing together what the story is was great. Now this goes for $50, and if you want the Switch 2 edition, that'll cost you an extra $250. I guess this would be the best time to explain what benefits you're getting out of playing this on the Switch 2. You get mouse mode, which worked flawlessly in handheld mode, because you can also go up to 120 frames per second, and while this isn't a very demanding game by any chance, it was especially helpful during the escape game when I was trying to solve the puzzles in a time limit, because it felt like the mouse was almost reading my mind with how quickly it would register when I needed to pick up certain Tetris pieces during the shape processing puzzles. And even when it plays at 60 frames, really the only noticeable difference that I could tell was that the mouse seemed to leave a lot more noticeable trails, but the fact that you get between 60 to 120 frames per second is very impressive. Even if you don't use the mouse mode, you don't feel like you're at a significant disadvantage using just regular controls. But I do think $50 is a bit steep for a game that is frankly kind of ugly for Switch 2 edition standards. Like, as far as I'm aware, they didn't change the resolution at all, and it just feels like a lot of corners were cut to make sure that the story was as good as possible. Like, minor characters, you won't even see faces on them, for example, and the same old cardboard cutouts with different poses just kind of gets old after a while, and the backgrounds seem almost blurry because the game is going for a watercolor aesthetic. I would say get this for maybe $30 or $40 and just skip the Switch 2 edition altogether unless you really want the experience of playing with a PC mouse. But even then, it's not strictly necessary to enjoy the game. But I think if you either get it on sale or rent it like I did, you'll be in for a great time, as long as you don't consider any of these genres to be a replacement for the games that inspired them. So with that, thank you very much for watching, my friends. I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful day, and until the next time, remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye!